It always has puzzled me why, with Einstein, as being aware of how brilliant he really ended up being, that whenever someone calls you Einstein, it's rarely a compliment. I can't find my car in the parking lot. All right, Einstein. Anyway, just that was just a curious. I mean, my brain always takes a little turn there, Overcoming obstacles is what we're going to talk about today from the 4th chapter of Nehemiah. If you've been here with us through the series so far, what you know that we're talking about a cause, something to live for. We're talking about the idea that whenever God presses something on our hearts that's critical, that's important for us to pay attention to and do something about, it allows us the opportunity to act, to do something about it. And Nehemiah, in chapter 1, was told about the disarray of Jerusalem. Now, this wasn't new news in the sense that actually this has been a long history. The world powers had taken over and had just demolished Jerusalem in many ways, even the temple. But the temple had recently been rebuilt, but the walls were still in shambles, and so there was plunder going on all the time. And for whatever reason in that moment, that in God's timeline, we see God press into Nehemiah the desire to do something about this. And he started off by intercession, by praying, interceding between God and the people of Israel. And in doing so, then the king recognized and realized that something was wrong with Nehemiah's spirit. And if you haven't been here, Nehemiah was the cupbearer, which means he ended up being one of the closest associates the king would have, because he had to eat or drink everything that the king was going to eat or drink before him. And so, very close associate of the king. And the king heard his heart, gave him permission to go, and not only go, but to go with protection, to go with provision, and to go for an extended period of time to take care of this situation. Nehemiah went, he assessed, he didn't obsess, but he assessed the situation and saw what the needs were and looked at it. Then he shared why he was there, why the timing was right, and why they needed to go into action. And so last week we talked about how everybody started rebuilding the wall right in front of their house. The next person to them, next person. So work was really beginning to take off and get started. So in chapter 4, what we see is that they ran into some challenges. They ran into some obstacles. They ran into some opposition. And I guess I would like for you to think with me about, as we talk about this, what is it that is tough enough, strong enough of an opposition for us to stop doing what we think is important? And I'm not talking about just anything right now. I'm talking about things that are critical or important. And critical may be a small list, but important's a pretty good size list. We kind of gave a list last week to you of things that you could look at and say, what are the greatest needs in this area of my life, this area, this area, this area, this area. And hopefully you reflected on that some this week and identified some areas. So in those areas, let's just say, for instance, if you went away saying, I'm going to work on my marriage. And that doesn't mean that you make your spouse your project. That means that you look at yourself and start there. What can I do? How can I make some changes? How can I maybe communicate better than we have before? Whatever the issue is. Maybe it was related to things having to do with your children, such as I'm going to pray with them at night before they go to bed. I'm going to get a good Bible story book, and I'm going to read to them, not just Dr. Seuss, that's fun to read. But I'm also going to read some Bible stories to them as well and have that interaction. It might be that on your job, that you're going to reassess kind of the situation and say, how is it that God wants me to make a difference here in this environment, in this place, and to kind of have a cause to kind of raise the standard, or to, not that you're trying to control other people, but just yourself to be an example of how to honor God through our work. Again, I'm not going to go through the whole list, but if you identified an area, then what I'd like for you to do is kind of carry that with you today into our message. Because what happens is we all start good things with good intentions, and even great intentions. But you know the phrase that says the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Now, we can discuss anyway, I don't want to get distracted with that, but what I want to say is good intentions is not good enough. Because if we just have good intentions, we'll have a tendency to get started and then allow small things and maybe some big things to stop us. If doing a great work for God, or doing a great work as a husband or as a father, or doing a great work in our career, if achieving some sense of being a difference maker were easy, everybody would be a difference maker. The reason you have standout people who seem to have achieved something very, very significant is not because that was a person who just had good intentions. It's a person who persevered. And I would also even say this: I do not believe that the greatest intelligence is what generally makes somebody successful. It's something else. There's something else called perseverance. And sometimes I think psychologists are doing a little more talking about emotional IQ. And if you do not have a good emotional IQ, I don't care how brilliant you are or anything else, the tendency is you're going to live probably below your potential. Someone with a good emotional IQ may live well beyond their potential, just as far as innate potential. And so it's a very critical area to understand and to know something about, and know something about ourselves. But let me ask this question. How many of you have ever started a project but didn't finish it? Can I just see your hands? Okay. I'm expecting all hands to be in the air, by the way. This was not one of those like, well, I think there'll be several that probably haven't. I know there's some of you that are like follow through. You might have a struggle, but I bet if we really examine your life, we can come up with something. And most of us, all we'd have to do is go in our garage, or go in the attic. That would be a pretty good starting place. And I certainly don't say that critically, because I'm there too. And so we all know what it is to start things, but not necessarily follow through. I would venture to say that there's many things that you may start that aren't worth following through on. Really, I mean, some of them aren't that. But if it is important, or if it is critical, then it should be followed through, and we should push through. And the challenge that we all face is this: every day that we live is a day God's given us, and it's a day of opportunity. Every day that has been lived has already been lived. We can't go back and change that. That's what it is. But every day today and every day ahead of us, we have an opportunity. And here's what I've come to find out is I know it shocks some of you that I'm in my 50s, but I am. I know you were thinking probably like just barely 30 or something. But the reality is that as I've come into my 50s, I've started seeing this Christmas stuff popping up in places. I had to make a quick run to the grocery store last 24 hours out in Kroger over here in Evans, and they had all these like Santa things right out by the curb, and I'm thinking, they had 50 of them. I'm thinking, are you really? First of all, they look kind of dorky, and I'm thinking, are there really 50 people who will buy those first? But I'm going, Christmas. It's October, the first week of October. How are we doing this? And Kim was bringing up some stuff to me about, Christmas and all that stuff, and I'm like, do we have to talk about this? I feel like it was like 5 months ago we did Christmas. It's like now every 6 months. The year is about every 6 months. It's just wrapping by so fast. And so if we don't make the most of every day, it will pass rapidly, and we'll wake up and go, how did I get here? I had wanted to do this. I'd wanted to do that. We'll never accomplish everything we want to do, but hopefully we'll accomplish the critical and important things, and in particular as it relates to our relationship with God and with other people, because those are the things that truly matter the most. Now, I'm going to ask you to look with me and note some obstacles that Nehemiah faced as he was rebuilding the wall. Jumping, but one that's not on your list there that I'm going to go ahead and throw into it. There's several other areas in Nehemiah where opposition occurred, but I'm really going to stick with chapter 4, except for this first one. You can just write in, and that is Nehemiah 2:19. There was an accusation that they were rebelling against the king. Now, that wasn't a very solid accusation because of the fact that Nehemiah was the king's cupbearer and he was given the permission and everything. But it was an intimidating kind of force to say, if word gets back to the kingdom and into the kingdom leaders, you're down here doing this. This looks like absolute rebellion. So they started there with that. And then if you look at chapter 4, verse 1, it says, now it came about that when Sanballat heard that we were rebuilding the wall, he became furious and very angry and mocked the Jews. So we see, number one, angry, external opposition, under external opposition, angry outbursts and bullying. You may not experience that often, but it's possible to experience that right even within your own family. It's possible to experience it in the workplace. It's possible to experience it in other categories or areas of our life. That someone will try to intimidate us, and that's on the other side, the internal opposition. What happens whenever there are angry outbursts, there's bullying, there's accusation, false accusation, then it has an intimidating effect. We become intimidated. And so let's just say, for instance, you say, I'm gonna pray with the kids every night before they go to bed, or even say 5 times a week. And you say, to your spouse, I'd like for you to maybe take 1 or 2 of those nights if you could, or we could do it together. And all of a sudden they go, what are you talking about? I mean, I work 90 to nothing. I come home, I just want to relax. I mean, I'll play with the kids some and all that, but what do you think I am, a priest or something, praying with the kids? And now, when that happens, there's an intimidation factor that happens, and you kind of have to make a decision. How am I going to handle this? How am I going to go about this? And right now, I'm just kind of identifying the different areas, and we're going to talk about some guidance for overcoming these obstacles and opposition. And so whenever we become intimidated, it makes us withdraw a little bit from what we think might be important or critical. The word says itself, it has an intimidating effect on us. And so that can happen. Number 2, mockery, ridicule. Verse 2, it says this. He spoke in the presence of his brothers. This is Sanballat, who is an enemy of Israel. He spoke in the presence of his brothers and the wealthy men of Samaria and said, what are these feeble Jews doing? Now, last I checked, if someone called you feeble, that wasn't a compliment, okay? And so he's saying, what are these feeble Jews doing? And then notice the other questions that come along behind it. Are they going to restore it for themselves? In other words, this is a joke. These are rhetorical questions. He's not looking for an answer. This is an insulting kind of barrage of questions. He is mocking them. He is ridiculing them. And these questions are intended to have that effect. Are they going to restore it for themselves? Can they offer sacrifices? I mean, these people are run down, beat down. What is their problem? Can they finish in a day? What do they think they're doing? I mean, these people have been disheveled, walls torn down for centuries now. And what are they going to do? Go out here and fix this whole thing in a day? I mean, you've heard people say, well, I hear what you're saying. I mean, don't forget, Rome wasn't built in a day. What they're really saying is, I think you're being a little too optimistic. If I could rain on your parade just a little bit, and you know what? We may need a little pushback sometimes, but the fact is that whenever someone is doing that, there's an element of almost some ridiculing what we're setting out to do. Can they finish in a day? Can they revive the stones from the dusty rubble, even the burned ones? I mean, like, look, man, these stones and these bricks have been here forever like this, and what are they gonna do? Raise them up out of the dirt and the dust and the ashes and put this thing together? And so, just insult after insult, mockery, ridicule. And so what happens for a person whenever we are ridiculed, whenever we are mocked, we become insecure. And we can easily have inferior feelings. The Jewish people had every reason in this setting to feel inferior. They had been inferior. They were inferior in the sense of their surroundings. They were run over. They were taken over. But people were taking advantage of them. And even some of the Jews, as we mentioned last week, were making profit off of the downtrodden scenario of the Jewish people. And so they already felt insecure. They already felt inferior. If they hadn't, they would have done this a long time ago. But they didn't. Nehemiah came in, called them to this work. They pulled together. They started doing it. And now this mockery, this ridicule. And I would like to say that, most of the time our enemies or those who would resist us doing good things or right things or important or critical things that would really make a difference in our life and the lives of others around us, I believe that oftentimes this is a lot more subtle in our world. But it still exists. We still can, we still, all of us, I don't care how secure you are here, we all have some level of insecurity. We already have some feelings of feeling inferior. Maybe not, maybe it's just a little area. But if somebody ever pokes that on you, it is like taking a balloon and just deflating it. It can just bring us down. And so that's what their intent was. Their intent was to ridicule them, to make fun of them, to the point that they would realize that, wow, they were really trying to take on a big thing here, and it may not work out so well. So made them feel insecure. I would like to ask you, and I guess I'll ask it, just don't raise your hand. How many times have you ever kind of just maybe even been dreaming about something that you thought was very, very important, very good thing, very important thing to do, or maybe even a critical thing to do, but had people respond to you in such a way that you just felt like they didn't believe in you, like they didn't see that you could do that, like they didn't really value what you brought to the table on that. That's not a good feeling. And you have to dig really deep when that happens to stick to it. You have to dig very, very deep. And you have to go back to what we talked about last time. Why am I doing this in the first place? What is the reason behind it? And if we don't understand that, and if you weren't here last week and would like to get a CD of it, the CDs are free for the taking. You're welcome to pick one up at the information table. Because if you don't understand and know that, these kinds of opposition, subtly or outright like these are in this situation, they will have a tendency to deflate us and we'll just give up. Number 3, sarcasm and put downs. Look at verse 3. It says, when Tobiah the Ammonite was near him, and he said, even what they are building, if a fox should jump on it, he would break their stone wall down. In other words, this thing is, they're building the wall and all that, but I mean, good grief, these people aren't masons. If they were, they'd have built this wall a long time ago. So, even if a fox jump on it, that thing's going to crumble. So this isn't any great work. This isn't anything that's really going to have lasting effect. It's just a crumbling wall that they've kind of thrown together here that will fall back down on them. Sarcasm can be fun. But here's kind of the rule of thumb that I like to use, and that is, if you use sarcasm, you need to make sure everybody's having fun. Because if you're the one having fun and other people aren't, it has a pretty negative effect on folks. So it's very important, do not use sarcasm in an unhealthy way. And in this case, it was very intentional. They were trying to put them down. This sarcasm was, hey, yeah, you can go ahead and do that, but, you can pray for your kids. You can pray with your kids, but, I know people have done that and their kids are awful. That's true, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't pray for them. So we're not talking about being guaranteed the outcome. We're talking about doing the right thing. That's what we're talking about. And so be careful about taking on sarcasm yourself or embracing sarcasm or put downs to the things that you really value, that you really believe are critical or important. And so what happens internally for us whenever people put us down or when they're sarcastic toward what we're doing, we feel hurt, we feel discouraged, and we want to quit. We just want to quit. It's like, I mean, this isn't worth it. It's not worth all the headaches. It's not worth all the hassle. It's not worth all the pain. And I just want to tell you, if it's truly a cause of God, it's worth it. It is worth it. Let people say whatever they want to say. Let them, run their mouth. Let them do their thing. Let them, be sarcastic about it, and keep on doing it. If you know it's the right thing to do, don't quit just because somebody else is saying it. I've found kind of different reasons why people do put people down who are doing something good or doing something right. And some of those reasons are sometimes they're jealous. You tell somebody, hey, I'm going to become a doctor, or I'm going to become a real estate agent, or I'm going to become this. And then people are going, man, I would never do that. That's the most ridiculous thing. And if the person, is just a lazy bum, don't let what they have to say bother you too much. You may not like hearing it, but go ahead and do. Go ahead and be who you feel like God's called you to be. Go ahead and pursue that. Don't allow naysayers to keep you from doing what you know in your heart is a cause you're to follow through on. And so it's really, really easy just to go, well, I'm just going to quit. People are saying all this stuff. They're doing this stuff. They're talking about it like this, and I'm just too discouraged. I'm going to quit. Don't. Not if it's important or not if it's critical. Don't quit. And the last one I'll mention as far as external and internal opposition is these guys ratcheted up. Sanballat, Tobiah, these guys, they notched it up a little bit. They went from just kind of making mockery, making fun of them, and and even bullying around a little bit and all that, to actually threats and conspiracy. They were putting together a plan to bring these guys down, and it was death threats. It wasn't just idle threats. Verse 8 says this. It says all of them conspired together to come and fight against Jerusalem and to cause a disturbance. That doesn't sound too bad, but go on down to verse 11, and it says this. Our enemy said, they will not know or see until we come upon them or among them, kill them, and put a stop to the work. Well, obviously, they kill them, it's going to stop the work. That's kind of obvious, but it's like we are going to stop this no matter what. These guys look pretty dogged and determined. Well, guess what? The mockery, the threats of intimidation and all that didn't work too well. Let's go take them out. This is not, thankfully we live in a culture where that can happen to somebody, but typically speaking, you don't live under threat just because you're going to try to do something great or significant, or because you're going to pray with your kids, or because you're going to, work on having a great marriage. Generally you're not going to have someone hire a sniper take you out because you're doing something that's significant. And so that's great and that's wonderful. But I will tell you this: all around the world today, there are people, not just Christians, but people of all religions who are under this same kind of threat from others around them because of their religious beliefs. And so we may not face this kind of thing directly here, but I want to tell you that's a real threat in our world. And if you ever feel like you've got a short prayer list on a given day or whatever, pray for the persecuted church around the world, because it's very real. There are many people who are martyred for their faith today. This is not an unusual thing in our world. It's just unusual in our specific country. And so what happens from that and the internal of us whenever there are threats and conspiracies is fear. And one of the things that I would say is one of the top ranking internal oppositions that we face with whatever it is we're doing is fear. It may not be fear of death, but it might be fear of failure. It might be fear of just not being good enough or not, whatever it is, fear of people's opinion, all those fears. And so fear oftentimes keeps us in a place God never intended for us to be. And so we have to be willing to face our fears. And Paul talked to Timothy, who was a young pastor and was like his spiritual son. And Paul said to him, Timothy, God has not given you the spirit of fear or intimidation, timidity. He's given you He's given you the spirit of love and of power and of a disciplined mind. And so that your mind is strengthened and you can face obstacles and challenge instead of kind of hunkering down in fear. And so however fear pops its head up in your life, in your emotions and your thoughts, obviously be aware of it. There's a good side to fear, but there's a terrible defeating side to fear as well. And so by the things that we're going to talk about here in just a moment, look at these areas of intimidation, insecurity, inferior feelings, hurt, discouragement, wanting to quit, and fear, and let's look at how we can turn these things around. And so guidance for overcoming obstacles and opposition on your notes, it should be verse 4. Trust God for vengeance. These guys were pretty ugly. They were coming after him. And you know what happens? You know how some people get sidetracked? They get sidetracked by trying to get even. Well, if they're going to say that about me, let me tell you something about them. And it just starts this kind of battle of words, which, in my opinion, never has really achieved very much except escalate the battle. And so Nehemiah was pretty ticked off, but he went to God with a sense of urgency, and he says, "Hear, O our God, how we are despised." He's going, these people really don't like us. They really don't like what we're doing. Return their reproach on their own heads and give them up for plunder in a land of captivity. Now, I'm not suggesting that you pray that for your next door neighbor or for your big brother or for, someone else in your world that you just don't like, and you feel like, man, they've ticked me off. So, okay, I'm glad we went through chapter 4 here. This gave me a great prayer to pray for them. And but here is what Nehemiah is doing a work of God, okay? He's realizing these people are trying to stop the work of God. Notice something he did. He did ask God to deal with them severely. But he didn't say, all right, God, right at this moment, we're going to stop building this wall and we're going to go get them. They said this about us. Watch what we'll do toward them. He didn't do that. He really put it to God. He gave God some suggestions. Yes, he did. But he gave it to God, and he kept after the work, and we'll see that in a minute. And so whenever you feel attacked by somebody or something, this really brings in a lot of, with regard to forgiveness. You can go through your whole life and hold a grudge at somebody because of things they've done for you, but it will not make you a better person. And understand, forgiving somebody does not mean you do lunch with them once a week. You can forgive someone and never have another conversation with them the rest of life. They may have violated you so severely that you can't be around them, you can't be with them. But for you to embrace bitterness and anger toward that person will not ultimately hurt them, it will hurt you. And so for Nehemiah to go, for him to stop at this point and just go, man, I am not going to take that from these guys. We're going to settle the score here. Here's what he said. He said, God, we're in trouble, and I'm going to ask you to settle the score. You settle the score. Here's why we don't like letting God settle the score. Because he doesn't do it when we think he ought to do it, and he doesn't do it how we think he ought to do it. And so we don't want to relax and go, okay, God, that's in your hands. I'm going to give that to you. I'm going to give you some suggestions on how to do it, even. But never embrace bitterness, because bitterness will kill you, not your enemy. Number 2, recognize morale busters when you see one. Verse 5, says this, and this is prayer is going on, and here's some pretty serious language, again, Nehemiah is using. He said, do not forgive their iniquity, and let not their sin be blotted out before you, for they have demoralized the builders. Now, we can argue all day long whether that was a legitimate prayer or not, but again, Nehemiah was looking at this as people who were being enemies of God, not even necessarily his own personal enemies so much as enemies of God. And so if you put that in the context, you can kind of understand maybe that a little bit more. And so he was ticked off, and he was telling God about it, and he's saying, you know what? These guys have demoralized the builders. God, do something about it. But remember this, and there's two things he recognized. One was he saw this had an effect on his builders, on the people building the wall. They were demoralized. So the intimidation, the insecure feelings, the hurt that happened, the wanting to quit, discouragement, fear, it was working. It was working. Their morale was down. And I'm going to tell you, you get morale down in any team or anything else, it takes a lot to pump it back up and to get where it is. And so Nehemiah's ticked off about it. He's ticked off these guys are enemies of God, and they're doing this. And he's going, look, I got two problems. I got two issues. One is I've got low morale with the builders. The second one is this. I've got an enemy that's pretty serious here, God. You do something about it. Now, I don't mean that they're, these are serious enemies of what was going on. And so they're not the kind of people to bring to the table and say, hey, let's sit down together and talk about how to build this wall. They weren't interested in the wall building. They had no interest in the building of the wall, these enemies. And Nehemiah had absolute interest in building a wall. You can't collaborate with people who have absolutely different opinions about what needs to happen. There has to be some sense of common ground. There wasn't common ground here, so Nehemiah couldn't go pursue that with him. What he could just simply do is say, God, these people are against everything we're doing. You take care of them. So that was God's job, and it was his job to deal with the morale busters. So number 3, what do you do in response to that? You stay focused on the cause. If you'll look at verse 6 with me, it says this. So we built the wall, and the whole wall was joined together to half its height, for the people had a mind to work. Nehemiah understood the morale was low, the job wasn't done. But he was able to show them, look, guys, we've made it to kind of the halfway mark here. I mean, the wall's all connected now. We got to go higher. But it's all connected. And so guess what? Let's get it done. Let's go ahead and finish it up. And it got there, and it got where we're going to get to in the next couple of weeks because they had a mind to work. They put their mind, they stayed focused. You have to stay focused on your cause. Whenever we are intimidated, we feel insecure, we want to quit, we're discouraged, or we have fear, most of the time the reason we quit doing things that are of great value, things we even value, things that are important or critical in our lives is because we get distracted. How many of you have ever said, I'm going to clean my closet out today? Anybody ever said that? I'm going to clean my closet out today. Now, I'm not going to ask you the rest of what I'm going to say here, but here's what can happen very easily, especially if you have any papers or pictures, on a shelf in there or something like that. And you sit down and you go, well, rather than just move this box to the attic, I probably had to go through it, kind of forget what's in here. So you go through and you found all your love letters. And you're going, well, I'm going to get the closet clean. I'm not going to, so I would just set those over there. But then you're going, oh, look at that one. And then all of a sudden you start reading, and it's like hours went by. And you're going, okay, well, I'm going to set that over there. I'm not sure where I'm going to put those. But then what I'm going to do is here, why am I keeping these old yearbooks from when I was in high school? And so I just probably need to figure out what I'm going to do with those. But then you go, man, remember that girl I dated? Or I wonder, I forgot kind of what they look like. And so you open the book, and then you had all your friends writing in there. So you're reading that, and you're going, the day's in, and you've made a worse mess by pulling stuff out and reading it than anything about cleaning up your closet. Don't raise your hand, but I know it's happened in some way or another, for you. We get distracted. Those are good distractions. Those are okay distractions. But It is so easy, and negative things will particularly distract us. You're doing a good job. You're never to be a good parent, and all it takes is someone saying, word gets back to you that someone said, man, you're a lousy parent. Whoa, crash and go, man, I've been doing all this stuff, trying to do it all right, trying to be a better disciplinarian, trying to train better, and that's what I get. You know what? It doesn't matter what the press says. Okay? Stay focused on what you know is the right thing to do. The easiest thing to do is take negative information and turn it into Project Halt. It stops. Just because somebody said something, someone indicated something, someone, whatever. Don't. Stay focused on the cause. Number 4, be consistent. Look at verse 7. Now, when Sanballat, Tobiah, and the Arabs, the Ammonites, and the Ashdodites heard that the repair of the walls of Jerusalem went on, and that the breaches began to be closed, they were very angry. Here's the key phrase I want you to look at. It says, they heard that the repair of the walls of Jerusalem went on. In other words, all of their intimidation, all of their mockery, all of their bullying, all of their sarcasm, all of their threats were not working. God, make that so for me, and make that so for you. Help us to throw off discouragement like an old jacket that doesn't fit anymore. Help us to throw out intimidation like we would spit out something that was disgusting to the taste. Help us to rid ourselves of these things that hold us back and keep us from doing what we do. Here's what I've found to be true, and I wish it was broader in my life than it is. The areas of my life that I've been consistent in are the areas where the greatest strength occurs, where the greatest results occur. The areas of consistency always bring greater results. And the reason is because you stay after it. And if you stay after anything long enough, you will see some success. That's the reason why I like to say, if you feel like you're terrible at reading the Bible, just make up your mind you're never going to quit. If you feel like you're terrible at praying, just make up your mind you're never going to quit. Because if you keep coming back to it, keep coming back to it, keep coming back to it, someday you'll realize you've taken quite a journey from where you started. And so it's critical for us to be consistent. The work went on. That really means a lot to me, because these guys had every reason in the world to quit, but it didn't stop them. What does it take to stop you? If you find out you stop, start again. Number 5, be prepared, verse 9. And this is a really key verse. It's your memory verse for the day. So it may seem like an odd memory verse at first, but let me explain it. But we prayed to our God. This is after they were hearing that they were actually going to come and kill him, come to disturb him and kill him. We prayed to our God, and because of them, we set up a guard against them day and night. 2 things Nehemiah did. He went to God and said, God, this is bigger than us. This is pretty serious. It looks like our lives are in danger. So we're trusting in you, not thinking you're not going to come through, but we're going to go ahead and set up guards against them day and night. In other words, he prayed and he did something. I believe most of the time, God requires us to pray and do. Pray and do. Totally depend on God as if he's the only one that can do it, and do everything we can to make sure we've done our part to aid in the process. There's a reason why all through the scripture, every miracle you see Jesus perform, someone contributes something to it, such as the miracle of the 5,000, feeding the 5,000. They took a little boy's lunch. Don't you think if Jesus could take that little lunch and turn it into enough food to feed 15,000 people, that he could have done it by the snap of his finger? He could have, but he used the little bit that was offered up. He always takes our little bit and uses that. We can't sit in a rocking chair and go, God, do your thing. God's saying, if you get out of your rocking chair and do your thing, I'll do my thing. And so Nehemiah prayed, and he did. And so maybe in a situation where you feel like God is not answering prayer, maybe there's something you need to do. Don't do something foolish and don't do something just to do it. But analyze carefully and say, is there a step that I can take to move this forward? Do everything that I can do and trust God with everything I cannot do. Do everything I can do and trust God with everything I cannot do. That's the only thing I know to say. That's what Nehemiah did. He could put together a ragtag guard unit, he did, but he also prayed to God. Look at verses 12 through 23. I'm not going to read them all to you, okay? But I'm going to summarize them. Just myself. Number 6 is develop a good offense and defense plan. Now, the work did get slowed down, and here's the reason the work got slowed down, because their lives were under threat. So you know what Nehemiah did? He told everybody, he said, put on your work clothes and bring your weapons with you. In one hand, hold your weapon. In another hand, do your work. And then at nighttime, they took shifts and different people set up guard. And so, yes, they couldn't work constantly like they were doing, so it slowed the work down, but it didn't stop the work. They were ready to do battle if they had to do battle. And Nehemiah, I would encourage you to read the rest of the chapter just because it's really an interesting story how it happens that in this situation, he sets up where he has some people play with trumpets around the wall. And so if an enemy attacked, that person would blow the trumpet and all of the workers would come and they were already armed. They were ready to do battle. Now, they weren't a super professional army, I can promise you that. But I can tell you this, that if I've got a ragtag team and they're working hard enough to build a wall and they've got some kind of weapon in their hand and they have something to protect, that can be a pretty bad crew to come up against. And so it stopped the attack that was going to happen. It stopped the attack. It actually stopped them in their tracks, because it says in verse 15, when our enemies heard that it was known to us and that God had frustrated their plan, then all of us returned to the wall, each one to do his work. And then it goes on to tell about how he did that. And so your work may be slowed down by obstacles, by opposition, by difficulty, but please, the things that God has called you to do as a believer, as one who is a Christ follower, as one who knows who you belong to, that it would be very critical for you to say, God, I'm not going to stop doing the things that honor you, that make my life better, my family's life better. I'm not going to stop doing the things that are beneficial to the kingdom of God. I'm not going to stop doing those things. I'm going to continue. I can promise you, after pastoring for 30 years and having walked with God since about 16 years old, that there are times that we all come into obstacles. I've witnessed it in many people's lives. I've witnessed it in my own life, where without doubt, it slows us down. It does slow us down. The opposition is so significant and so strong. Sometimes it's internal, sometimes it's external, oftentimes it's a mix of both. But I want to tell you what I've found to be true, that if you keep taking one more step in the right direction, even if it's a half of a step, even if it's a quarter of a step, you'll find you made significant progress, even in spite of severe opposition. Let's pray. Lord Jesus,